I'm going to introduce you and say really nice things, and then Nick has prepared for this occasion. Right. Would you rather sit next to me? Him. Are you happier over here?
I'm good.
Okay. It takes us a little while to settle
I'm
in,
good.
guys, right?
I might even be a little better than that.
You're watching the sausage get made.
There we go. I hate this chair. I always fall out of it. Right. So, Patrick, tell me when we're live, and we'll get going. Thank you very much. Good evening, everybody. We'll start this all over again. Thank you so much for coming out tonight. Virtual audience, thank you for joining us. What a pleasure it is to do another book launch for John Sandford and his new book, Lethal Prey. He's written 59 books, but not all of them about Lucas. Well, don't just sit there. You're supposed to respond.
Oh, I mean, you're right.
I was waiting for you to enumerate the other books, but that's probably too hard. Okay. No. All right. And I love doing this with John. You just never know what's going to happen. Right, Nick? You ready? And Nick Petrie, who will be publishing his 9th book next year, his 9th Peter Ash book, one of our very favorite writers, has, as I previously said, come out from Milwaukee for this occasion and is a longtime John Sandford fan.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
Right. So,
And as it happens, I'm a longtime Nick Petrie fan. The first book of his that I read was the first book that he published, and it was quite a good book.
well, so things should go
Thank
swimmingly,
you.
right?
Thank you.
So I would like to say before I shut up and Nick takes over how impressed I am that at 59 books, John has actually written a story structure that I'm not sure I've ever quite seen it before. And I love the fact that no matter how many books he writes, he always comes up with something different, something original. That's a remarkable achievement. So many people who write really long series, that's kind of a template and you know what to expect, but with John, you really don't. So Nick agreed with me, so take it away.
Yeah, I really enjoyed this book. I don't know. It's funnier, I think, than you're getting funnier, I think, in a good way. Because I don't think of you as a humorous writer per se, but this book cracked me up, and the last book, Toxic Prey, cracked me up too so many times. But so this book is about a cold case that turns hot, and so for reasons of sort of internal politics, which you describe per usual as utterly venal and self-serving on the part of the politicians, Lucas and Virgil get shanghaied into running this investigation. So kind of give us the setup for this.
Well, just what you said, we have a woman who's really sort of butchered, and her body is dumped in a small city outside of St. Paul, adjacent to St. Paul, and she's just a mess. I mean, there's a sign that whoever did it was not only disturbed, but was kind of emotionally involved in the murder, which was done with a knife, and so it was really ugly. And there was not a single thing that the cops had to go on back in the day. They did preserve DNA. The woman who was murdered was found to have, she had had sex twice that day, once shortly before she was murdered and once earlier in the day. One of the men that she had sex with did not use a condom, and the other one did. They found evidence of a condom use when they did the examination. And then the only other clue that they had were some footprints around where the body was dumped, which was in kind of a wet, not a wet area, but a marshy area, sort of something that would take footprints. And that was the only clue that they had. And unfortunately, the clue was size 10.5 Nikes. And, not good, because half the men in America wear Nikes that are size 10.5. So it goes on for years, a couple decades. And then the woman who was murdered had a twin sister who became quite affluent, and she offers a huge reward. $5 million for somebody who can turn up the killer. And she specifically puts the reward on true crime sites, hoping to pull true crimer people in because she thinks that since the Bureau of Criminal Apprehension in Minnesota, the state police, since they haven't been able to do anything in all these years, that maybe crowdsourcing would work. Get a lot of people working on it from these true crime sites, doing statistics, doing numbers, looking at public records, looking at all kinds of stuff that a police agency really isn't able to do because they just don't have enough personnel to spend it on what likely is a waste of time. And so that's what starts it. And Davenport and Lucas and Virgil are kind of roped in not to do the direct investigation, but to coordinate with all these true crime people, which they really don't like. I mean, because they feel right from the beginning that the true crime people are going to drive them crazy. And they do to a certain extent, but not entirely. It turns out that some of the crowdsourcing idea is not a bad idea. And so then that develops into the story. And the other part of the story is the view of the murderer. We see the murder right from the beginning. We see the murderer all the way through, and right up to the end. The only departure from all my other books that I have is I actually have a real person in it who is a lawyer, defense attorney in St. Paul, who I know, and who has been involved in some of the more controversial cases in St. Paul very successfully as a defense attorney. And so I just stuck him in there because he's kind of a friend of mine. And he's defending the killer. And so that's what the book's about.
So the killer, to me, like, I loved this piece of the book. You do villains really, really well. I think that's,
You just gave away the sex of the killer, and I was so careful not to do that.
But
we
do find that in the first chapter,
yeah,
though.
Okay.
It does. It's not.
Right,
It's
right,
really
yeah.
not a deal.
Yeah, it's like on the first page, I guess, so it's not a big deal. All right.
But so, like, we all know Virgil and we all know Lucas, but you're giving us a new antagonist every time, and this one is particularly kind of spooky. And how did you sort of come up with sort of her and how you were going to portray her? Because we get a different sense of her than we do of really anybody else in the book. We get a much deeper look into her internal life.
Well, I've known quite a few people like her, actually. Not as killers, but. But I guess this is in the first. I guess this is in the first chapter too. She's a prosecutor. She works for the county as a prosecutor, and she prosecutes murderers. And so she knows a lot about the techniques of murder, and she knows a lot about the techniques of evidence, and she knows how to get away with things, and that's why she gets away with them. But the thing is, I've known a lot of prosecutors. Are there any prosecutors here, or anybody who used to be a prosecutor? Okay, good. Because a lot of them are fairly heartless. They really are. I mean, especially the burned out ones who are like 44 years old and have been doing it for 15 years since they got out of law school. I mean, they're killers, and sometimes they don't care too much about the rules of evidence. They do things that are sort of awful. Some of them are very nice, and actually, I find them. Generally, the women prosecutors are kind of attractive. It's like because they're hard nosed, and that makes them interesting. But that's where her personality came from. Is from the people I know.
Do you start with the villain? How does a book begin for you?
Yeah, that's where I started, and that's where I usually start. I usually start with a villain because you take the other 59 books and then you go through them and say, well, I had somebody doing this and that and the other thing. And so what haven't I done? And I've had a lot of really bad guys, and really brutal killers, but not quite like her because she's so clever. And she's both clever and also kind of emotionally driven. And so that's I think that's the kind of thing that makes her interesting.
So the crime bloggers, how did you is this something, are you a big true crime person? Is this part of your personal life that you sort of wanted to throw in?
No,
Did this
no.
just a social phenomenon that you're interested in?
When I knew what I was going to do, I did research. So I went on true crime sites and I hung around
Right.
and looked and see what was going on.
Well, and I love how kind of ruthless they are. These true crime folks, are so driven to beat each other and to, like, it's just sort of another side of our villain who's very competitive, who wants what she wants. So are you making choices like that deliberately? Is that part of your sort of your process?
No, I think it just kind of folds out of the story naturally, and they sort of have to be that way to be effective as part of the story. I mean, it just kind of a requirement that they be that way, even if they normally aren't that way. To make the story, to push the story forward, they sort of have to be that way.
Yeah, but Nick, could I interrupt and say, I think one of the things that's really interesting about the true crime people or the blog, they have no boundaries. They have absolutely no boundaries. They're perfectly willing to trample on the crime scene. They compete with each other. I mean, there's no real sense of community working together. They are intensely competitive. Of course, there's $5 million on the line. But what they're really more interested in, I think, than the money is getting more followers. It's all about
getting clicks.
It's just like the media. I mean, you're a Pulitzer Prize winning reporter, but you were reporting back in the days when it wasn't an object to get clicks.
So let me step aside for a little bit here, and I'm going to ask Nick a question. Where Nick's books have got his main character, Peter Ash, is a Marine who's suffering from post-traumatic stress syndrome, post-traumatic stress disorder, I guess it is now. And I had a friend like that who died last year, who was a Marine in Vietnam. And you have, his girlfriend refers to him as Jarhead and as Marine, and where does the military stuff come from? Does that come from research? Where does the PTSD stuff come from?
So I have a friend who served in Vietnam, and he was a recon Marine as well, and he has not Peter's version of post-traumatic stress, because there's many different versions of that as there are people who suffer from it. But I grew up with his kids, and I sort of internalized the June calling Peter Marine, hey Marine, that is what Jan calls Dale, especially when she's pissed at him. And so part of it is just the stuff you soak up. And then I was working I've been a carpenter and a cabinet maker and a furniture builder and a general contractor. And then for a while I was a freelance building inspector. So you hire a guy like me to tell you what's wrong with the house that you're buying. And during the crash, I had all these clients who were coming home from the surge in Iraq, and young men, young women who'd served and who were some of whom were physically damaged, and some of whom you could tell just were not quite themselves. And I really sort of fell for these young people who had signed up after 9/11 for an idea. They'd signed up for this idea of America, and nobody told them what the downside of that would be. Nobody told them what it was really like, and what it would be like to come home. And so I was super interested in that idea, because I was seeing people who were like, okay, I did this thing for 8 years, and now what the hell do I do? And so that's where Peter came from. And the military stuff, I never served in the military. I'm big on research. I've talked to lots and lots of folks about post-traumatic stress and being in the service and all that stuff. But it really came from this experience as a kid with my dad's friend, and with this experience in my previous work life. So that's where it comes from.
And Peter was wasn't he in Fallujah?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, so that's what his post-traumatic stress shows up as claustrophobia, and it shows up as basically a panic attack. He goes inside for too long, and this is earlier in the books. He part of what I'm doing with the series is sort of showing how Peter can put his life back together. So the first book, he's basically living out of his truck or living in a tent because he can't be inside. The second book, he falls in love and has a reason to push himself to get better, and so on and so on. Okay, now I can't remember what the question was. That's embarrassing.
Oh, you answered it well. Now, is this the book that's got the fat guy in it? Teddy? Is that his name?
Yes, that's Teddy, yeah.
Okay, Teddy.
With one eye.
Yeah. Where did that guy come from?
He just showed up. It just that's often what happens, where villains in my book often just show up, or sort of side characters. And I don't outline. And you're not an outliner either, right? Because your books are so constructed. They're so, like, the structure is so solid, and there's so much that happens. Like, I couldn't wing my way through that.
Well, if you actually looked at my manuscripts, you'd see blood all over them. That's how they get constructed. It's not easy.
Yeah. But again, I forgot the question. I don't. Well, so all right. So let's get back to you, because that's really why we're here. That's why you're here, certainly. You are known for the amount of research that you do, and you were a reporter for many years. Is that? I mean, I know other writers who have hired people to do their research for them. So why are you still doing your own stuff? Because it's got to be time consuming. Or do you just have all these sources already set up to ask these questions?
I think it's because I was a reporter, like you said, for many years. I hate to think how many years actually now, but I'd rather do the research. I think I've mentioned this before. I really kind of got into writing fiction for the money. I needed to send my kids to college, and my wife at the time wanted to go back to college, which she did, and she wound up with a PhD in immunology, which took years. And I needed the money, so I started writing fiction, and it caught on. The fact is that when I had a Pulitzer, and I was 40 years old, something like that, and I was making not enough money to send one kid to college. And this is a fairly large newspaper. The thing is that I really liked being a reporter a lot. I liked it a lot. My first wife died of breast cancer, and a few years later I ran into an old friend of mine, another woman, and we wound up getting married. And she was an exceptional reporter. And the fact of the matter is, I just like those people, and I just like that job, and I like doing it, and I like doing research. I have talked to these guys about a book that I have kind of in the back of my mind that would be a military-based book that I'm sure my publisher would hate the idea of, but I've got it in the back of my head that would be largely a reported book. It would be a military book that is largely reported, rather than some kind of bullshit about jumping out of airplanes into an ocean and swimming ashore and killing everybody. It would be because that's not my experience of the military. So to answer your question, I like doing research. I mean, that's really what I spend my days doing a lot of the time.
So like Michael Connolly, for example, has said that he started out as a reporter and as a crime reporter because he wanted to be a crime novelist. And so that's not how this was for you. This was, you just sort of thought, maybe I can do this? And your first book hit the New York Times list, right?
It hit the New York Times list in paperback, not as a hardcover.
Okay.
I mean, there's a big difference
Yeah,
there.
I know.
It's like and so the books have all done well, but the other thing is, the fact of the matter is, I hit what in football is called a seam. You want to hit that seam back there with your pass or with your running play, and then you get some extra yardage. And my first book came out when those kinds of books were doing very well, and the Wall Street Journal gave me a really nice review in it, and I got lucky. That's my view of it. And of course, I'm also a brilliant writer, but that's sort of my view of it, and is that there's a large element of luck involved in what happened with me, but I really like doing research.
When you've said that anybody who has written for a living can teach themselves how to write fiction. So how did you do that? How did you go from writing?
Well, I wrote 3 books that didn't sell.
Oh, I did that too. Yeah, that's a very common story.
Yeah, I think it's very common, and I wrote a book, and it sort of was. I knew it was bad when I finished it, and I tried, and an agent didn't want to look at it. I wrote another book that if it came out now, I would be beaten to death by women, and that's embarrassing. And my son keeps trying to erase it from his memory. And then the third book, the third book, the agent Esther Newberg, who had turned down the second book that the women would have beaten me up about, and she sold it, and it did not make any kind of a bestseller list. And then the fourth book was Rules of Prey, which did make the bestseller list. Then the publishing company, being greedy like all publishing companies, republished the first book, and then that made the bestseller list because of the first book. So they went back and picked up the early kid books, if anybody has read any of those, and they republished them. As New York Times bestseller author, and so then those made the list. And it's like.
So what do you read for fun? What's your
Mostly art books, nonfiction art books.
Come on, John. You bought tons of books from us. You read all over the place.
Pardon me?
Nick Herron, one of your favorite authors. You read a lot of fiction. I send you a lot
No,
of fiction.
Yeah, I read probably a novel a week, but what I spend awful lot of time reading is nonfiction art books, basically from about 1860 through to the current time.
about painting?
About painting,
Okay.
yes. Not sculpture or any of that stuff, but about painting. And because that's my hobby, and I really enjoy doing that. But I also read, I also read all of the people who are well-known thriller writers, like Lee Child and Nick Petrie and people like that, and Michael Connelly, who I think there's sort of like a scale of police stories, from very real to complete bullshit. I'm sort of in the middle, and Michael's down toward the real end, and I find his books very interesting because of that.
Let's see. Well, how can I run out of questions? I've never run out of questions.
I have one.
All right.
So let's talk about Virgil, because one of the things.
That is a question.
Well,
Yeah.
I love Virgil. Escape Clause with Virgil is one of my all-time favorite John Sandford books, and it's a double entendre title, the clause part, because there's a tiger in it. Okay? But anyway, I love Virgil, and one of the things that's so much fun in this book is that Virgil has become a novelist. So while the crowdsourced people are busily without boundaries, trampling on the crime scene and all the rest of it, Virgil is not really engaged in solving the case. Virgil is engaged in writing his novel. So, I just love that. And I think you put part of your own kind of process into Virgil.
Yes, I did.
Yep.
Well, and there's this great line, if I can find it in my notes here, where Lucas is giving Virgil crap about being a writer and how long can it possibly take? It's just typing. It's just typing, which I howled out loud.
Yeah, well, I think a lot of people kind of think that, just go over there and type for a while and something will come out, and it really doesn't work that way. The kind of an odd thing is that in newspaper work, it kind of does work that way. one standard newspaper column when I was working as a reporter was about 750 words long. And I could burp up 750 words on any subject that you wanted to think of in about 15 minutes. And it was sort of like typing, except, but when you're doing that, you have been given a set of facts. And when I was sent out on a really stupid story, 2 people were killed in a one-car automobile accident off Highway 441 in South Broward County. I could dictate it from a telephone without writing it down, just bleh, and the whole story would come out. And so there are different levels of doing this, but when you're trying to write a novel, you really do have to learn how to do it. And not only that, is that I think an awful lot of people think, you go to school and a teacher puts ideas into your head. A teacher teaches you how to do something, but that's not true. That is not the case. When you go to school, you have to learn. You have to learn it yourself. The teacher can guide you, and a teacher can do a lot of stuff, but you have to learn it. And if you just sit there kind of passively letting stuff be poured into your head, that's not going to work. That's not a good way to learn calculus. You've actually got to work through the problems, and you've got to work through all the stuff you're doing. And that's the same thing. I think that one of the things that I learned by writing the first couple of books that didn't sell was that nobody was going to help me. It was just, you're going to have to sit there and you're going to have to grind through it and do it. And then when you look back on it, you say, my God, how could I do something this stupid? The first book that I tried to write was a John D. MacDonald heavily influenced book. It was set in the Florida Keys, and it was called The Wheel Key Massacre. And it was terrible. And then, of course, there was the book that women would kill me for, which was also pretty bad. But actually, by that time, I kind of had the plot under control. It was just that nobody in the book was likable, which is a problem.
Well, so I tend to think of Virgil as sort of, he's the thinker, he's the people person, and Lucas is sort of the man of action. How do you think about them, and how do you decide kind of what each are going to do in a book like this? First of all, am I right in how I think about them?
Oh, sure. Lucas really likes to chase people. And when he chases them, he likes to see justice done, even if he's not seeing legal done. He, he was accused by a FBI agent, a woman FBI agent, who liked Lucas to begin with and no longer does, because Lucas lured a guy down to Georgia and killed him. And he gave the guy a chance, but he lured the guy down there and killed him. In another book, and it might even be the same book, he groomed a woman to kill another woman. And he actually did it. He manipulated that woman into killing another woman that needed to be killed and was not going to get killed. And he did it deliberately. So Lucas is a guy who is going to try to see justice get done, as ugly as it might be. Virgil kind of doesn't like to hurt people, and he doesn't like to shoot guns, and he doesn't like to do a lot of stuff like that. But so he's a much softer character. And the other thing is that it doesn't work very well in books, but most crooks are really stupid. And that's the thing that I ran into over and over and over again as a guy I was a general assignment reporter for 20 years, which means I did a lot of crime work. They are just the dumbest people on the face of the earth. I mean, they couldn't find their ass with both hands. And the thing is that that's the kind of people that Virgil runs into. Lucas runs into the crazies and the psychos and the really smart professors who are killing people and stuff like that. But Virgil tends to run into the guys, who are out there robbing gas stations and trying to make a living at it. And so that's kind of the difference. I got another question for you, okay? Tell me about the relationship between Lewis, who is a black thug, in a former reformed thug, and character, who is white and is not thug-like, except that he's got some military capabilities. How does that work? How did you make that work? It seems like they're very different characters.
Well, so they both have sort of good reasons for what they've done, and they both. I mean, so they're both introduced in the first book, and this is a relationship that has gone. There are really only three continuing characters. There's Peter, Lewis, and his Peter's girlfriend June, and how does it work? Lewis was a criminal when they met. Lewis was robbing high-end drug dealers for large sums of money, for reasons that we don't really learn until this book, actually, until the 8th in the series. We get a lot more of Lewis, but Peter shows up to help the wife of a Marine who he served with, who has died. So that's kind of how Peter enters that first book. But she has a previous relationship with Lewis, and he really lost his heart to her, which is not something you would expect from a guy who basically kills drug dealers for a living. And so Lewis is somebody who doesn't show a lot, but he's also sort of looking for a different life. And Peter is the excuse for him to basically decide he's going to stop his criminal life. And I don't want to give too much away about that first book, because I know you're all totally fascinated and are going to read it. But it ends up, Lewis feels grateful to Peter because Peter gave him a different life because of what he did with Peter. And Peter doesn't think about this in this way, but Peter collects people. People follow Peter. He was a platoon leader in Iraq and Afghanistan. So you have to really be a people person. You really have to know the men who are serving under you, and you have to know how they will each react and how they will deal with things that they're given to do.
Well, there's not really a racial component in it. It's just two guys, one black and one white, and while there's some obvious cultural effects, but one guy being black and one guy being white, that's different. But you don't feel like there's a racial difference between them. At least I don't.
I'm not interested in that per se. I mean, if you guys have read all of the Robert Parker's Spencer books, right? So Spencer and Hawke have this shtick that they do, and it was interesting in the 70s when there was more of a divide, and we're certainly divided now, but I think for a lot of people, the cultural differences are more important than the differences of skin color. And so they both have a similar outlook. Lewis was in the Army. He just used it to pick up some skills that he needed in his other professional life. And they both believe in doing the right thing, and they believe in honor in a certain way. But I don't know. I'm not super interested in that. In sort of the differences of people. I'm much more interested in the ways in which we are similar. Even the villains, I want you to know sort of what the villains' motivations are, and I want them to feel like real people. So I don't know. I don't know if I even answered your question, but
yeah, sort of. I would like to point out for people who read Robert Parker that those books are still being published, new books under new authors, and they still have Hawke and Spencer in them. And Spencer served in the Korean War, and that would mean that he and Hawke, at the age of 95, are still going down to the gym to box.
and beating
so
up bad guys.
These are tough guys. They are. It's like it's.
Well, you have to. I mean, this is an interesting thing, right? So long-running series, people have to make decisions early on. I don't think William Kent Kruger knew that he would be writing 20 of these books. I don't think C.J. Box knew he was going to be writing so many of those Joe Pickett books, and that they have made those.
How about John Sandford?
Well, I think you did know.
Lucas Davenport started out at 45 in 1990. So that's what, 35 years ago, right?
Yeah.
So he'd be 80, but he's 56 in the latest book, and I've just decided that it's fiction, So it's like.
So the other thing we could mention is that the dogs never get old either. I mean, there are dogs that are like 35 years old in some of these books, so it's amazing. I want to go back and talk about Virgil and Lucas a little bit because, Lucas, I still remember one of the more chilling conversations you and I have had, John, and we have had many chilling conversations, was that you were getting tired of Weather, and so you said to me blithely that, maybe you just kill Weather and the kids, and then Lucas would be, John talks like this. It's amazing. Whereas Virgil is much softer-hearted, although he's not as structured. I mean, Lucas is married. Lucas has kids. Lucas doesn't mess around, so to speak, using a clean word there. But Virgil is, he's now got kids. He's got...
He's on his fourth wife in the new book.
That's right. So, they're really quite different. But also, Lucas has had a trajectory of being a cop, and then, he's gone on to
he's moved up the food chain.
A U.S. Marshal. So, in this book, what is he? Is he still a U.S. Marshal? Is he now doing something different back in Minnesota?
No, he's still a U.S. Marshal.
Okay.
The reason I did that is, when you're writing a long series of books like that, you've got to take a lot of things into account, and as Nick is finding out and is going to find out more when he writes the rest of the books. But one of the things is that you need to kind of expand the territory that you're working in, and so as a Minneapolis cop, he can't go to St. Paul. He can go to St. Paul in hot pursuit or an investigation, but he doesn't really a St. Paul cop, and that's right across the Mississippi. As a BCA agent, where I moved him next, he has authority all over Minnesota. And of course, as a U.S. Marshal, everywhere. And so that's what I had to do, because I wanted to start writing some things that weren't all up in the North Woods or out in the prairie. Actually, you got a book in Iceland.
Yes.
Yeah, that's a departure. It's still colder than hell, but it's in Iceland. You have to, when you're figuring all this stuff out, it's complicated, because how do you write about a guy for 35 years when he starts out at 45 and now he's still investigating 35 years later? So, there's just a lot of strategy going on.
So was this just book by book? You say, okay, let's see. At what point did you say, holy cow, I'm going to be writing these for a long time, and so I need to make some changes? Or is this really just, I want to write a book set in Nebraska or Wyoming, and so he's got to be something else?
I'm not going to set a book in Nebraska, for God's sake.
Hey, I said a book in Nebraska.
Actually, Lee Child said a book in
He
Nebraska.
said many books in Nebraska.
Yeah, I know, but it's not. Nebraska's not for me. For one thing, they got the Cornhusker football team, which is just like I'm from Iowa, and Nebraska is sort of considered suburban Iowa, and that's the way I look at it. So, but now I'm completely lost track of what I was about to say. Why don't you ask another question?
What Nick was asking is, when you decided to, move him out, do you consider, like, for example, your Taos book? I love the book. Was it one book back or two books back? Which is set in Taos, and it becomes like a closed, like a country house murder, because you can lock Taos down. There are only 2 exit roads in Taos. I thought it was just brilliant. So in order to do Taos, you had to work for him, from him being a U.S. Marshal, right? Okay, but Nick's question was, how do you decide on Taos versus somewhere else now that you've got Lucas free to roam the country?
There aren't that many places with 2 exit roads, and that are big.
I understand, but
and also it was near where I live in Santa Fe, so I could go up there and do the research.
Okay.
But Taos is a very interesting place. For give you a 15-second geography lesson. On one side of Taos is the Rio Grande, and it's a huge gorge. It looks like the Grand Canyon. You can't get west from Taos except on two bridges, but one of them is irrelevant. But so there's one bridge. You block off that bridge, nobody can go west. There's one road over the mountains. You block off that, you can't get out of that. There's one road north, block that, you can't get out. And there's one road south, can't get out. Actually, there are two roads south, but you see what I'm saying. It's a very easy place to blockade. If my bad guys had been in Los Angeles, we'd all be dead. And why they weren't in Los Angeles. The other thing I wanted to do at that time is I was very interested in the city of Los Alamos. If any of you ever get a chance to go to Santa Fe, take a 45-minute trip up to Los Alamos. They've got the most amazing stuff up there, like a replica of the original little boy atomic bomb, full size, looks just like it, all that kind of stuff, and a lot of really interesting stuff up there, crazy scientific stuff. It's also the most, it has the highest level of education of any county in the United States because it's this little teeny county all by itself that's full of PhDs who are working on the atomic program and some other programs, research programs they've got up there. And it's also extremely wealthy, and the reason it's wealthy is because even though it's this little tiny town, it's got all these huge government contractors in it who are paying property taxes. So they get this glorious, property stuff. Streets and roads and parks and everything. And the people don't have to pay for it because it's all being paid for by these government contractors. So it's a very interesting place. And that's why I put one of my characters up there in one of the books. But those, Taos and Los Alamos and Santa Fe, are very interesting places.
Okay, but to focus, did you decide you liked Taos and so you found a story that would fit Taos, or did you decide you wanted to write a closed circle kind of a thing where nobody, and then
No, I started out with the idea of writing the germ.
Okay.
This is Toxic Prey, by the way. This is the previous book.
Toxic Prey.
I just
It
love the
was
book,
about
right.
is about the guy developing a germ, but then I had to find a place to put it, and it occurred to me that the obvious place to put it was right next door to me. Is only like 45 miles up the road.
So that answered Nick's question, right?
Yeah,
Yay.
sure. but so then how do you decide? So that's a Lucas and Letty book, right? So how do you decide who's, and you're mixing and matching, right, all the way through this last string of books. So how do you decide who? Is it the story? Is it the plot that you say? Oh, Letty has to be involved in this one because this is national security.
I like the Letty character.
Yeah, she's great.
And I just like her as a character. And also, she has a job like Lucas's where she has national authority, and because she works for the Homeland Security, and so it's credible that she goes there. I don't like the Agatha Christie type stories where every time Agatha Christie. Every time her heroine goes to a country house, somebody dies or somebody's found murdered. Why would you ever invite her back? I mean, because dozens of people are dead in country houses. And a thing is that they're very charming, but they're improbable. And a thing about putting your characters into a particular situation is that I want it at least to be possible, even if it's not really probable. So Letty works for Homeland Security. Lucas is a marshal. Put them together, and you could work that. And in this case, Letty finds out about it, and she calls up her boss and says, "You got to get Lucas here because Lucas is good at chasing people. That's what he does for a living." And so that's how he gets out there. Anyway, should we start asking questions?
Yes, we were. I was just saying to Nick, let's ask questions from the audience, right? So you pick, Nick. You're in charge.
I'm relatively new to your book, so I've not heard you interviewed before, so sorry if this is a question you've answered a million times. But when you came up with Virgil, for instance, did you know from the outset he'd be coming back? Or was it just by the end of the book you were like, I could use him again?
That's a very good question.
That's a very good question.
That's another one of those business decisions. the fact of the matter is at the time there were a number of series books out that did well, and they build upon themselves. There are other people who went in different directions and did individual books. Lawrence Sanders, for example, I don't know if he had any continuing characters, but he was an influence on me early on. He did very violent, interesting, in-depth books, but he didn't have. And at the time, what was going on was that there were a number of writers coming up who were doing series books, and that was sort of one of the pathways to success.
Another question?
So I heard you say you grew up in Iowa, so why did you pick Minneapolis?
Because that's where I was working.
Okay.
And it goes back to that whole reporting thing. And I will tell you, if there are people here who want to write, if you want to write a novel or if you want to write any kind of a thing, if you go and look at the place that you're writing about and then just write down what you see. And I do this all the time. As a matter of fact, I'm going to Minneapolis tomorrow and I'm staying for 4 extra days so I can look at stuff. If you write down just what you see, it'll pop. And if you don't do that, if you just pull it out of your ass, it won't work. I think it works much better if you actually look at what you're talking about and then write down what you see, because what you see will be idiosyncratic and people will pick up on that.
Well, and also you will have you get story ideas from being at a place. It's just the evocative piece of that as well. Yeah, I'm a fan of the showing up.
I recently drove across the country from Boston out here and have been working my way through your prey books, and was wondering if you could talk a little bit about what the process is of having your books turned into an audiobook. You had a wonderful narrator, Richard Ferrone, who I'm still getting through the books that he narrated, and it seemed like great luck because he does a wonderful job with your work. Just wondering if you could talk about that and what an author's input is.
I would like to, but I don't know anything about it.
It's
I
true.
really don't.
Oh, publishers
And I also
do that.
I also don't know anything about movies. I've had 2 of my books made into TV movies, and I never went to see them being made because I don't care. And if they weren't made into audiobooks, I still wouldn't care, because I'm a reader, and I went to a who wrote Lonesome Dove?
Larry McMurtry.
Yeah, I went to a Larry McMurtry thing, and actually it was a book conference, I think in Tucson, and Larry McMurtry got up. He's dead now, so I feel safe in saying this. He got up and really started talking about Oscars and film and all that kind of stuff. And it really annoyed me because I'm a book guy and he's supposed to be a book guy, and all he's talking about is how well he did in Hollywood. Well, screw that. I don't care about Hollywood. If the whole damn place fell in the Pacific Ocean, it wouldn't bother me. And it just annoyed the hell out of me that he spent all of his time talking about his successes in Hollywood when I wanted to hear about, how do you write Lonesome Dove?
So to keep it all straight, do you do a spreadsheet now? I mean, I couldn't keep track of all the stuff that's going on, and you started writing them, I'm guessing, before there were spreadsheets. So do you keep it all? Do you keep it all straight on a spreadsheet?
No, I don't outline, and Nick doesn't outline. Neither one of us outline. It's kind of an organic thing, but you have to remember one thing, is that when you read those books, you read them in 2 or 3 settings, and you read them over a period of 4 hours, but we're working on them for a year. And so we write 300 words at a time, so when we work, we don't really, it sort of becomes organic, and you work. But I will tell you that I belong to a thing called International Thriller Writers, and we have a convention every year in New York City. Every possible way of writing a book is done by thriller writers. Lee Child once told somebody in the media that he never wrote a word when he wasn't stoned. I don't use any kind of drugs at all, not even alcohol. And you have other guys. We had a guy at the International Thriller Writers get up and say, "This is the way you write a novel," and he proceeded to show you how you outline a novel. And by the time he gets finished outlining his novel, he just has to fill it in a little bit, and he's got in the book. Because he does exactly what you're talking about. He essentially has a spreadsheet of the whole book, and then he fills it in. And he sells a lot of books. So there's no one way to do it. It's just whatever you do. And Nick and I tend to write the same way, and we don't outline.
So I think maybe the question was also sort of about, like, do you keep a series Bible where, you know, do you keep track of, you know,
I can't remember the names.
who Virgil's, yeah, I mean, who Virgil's ex-wives are? Like, do you have that in a document somewhere so you can refer back?
All we know about, I'm not going to say that.
No, I was just going to say, those of you who have been to other John Sandford events will know that sometimes John spends his time plotting his next book with you while he's here, rather than talking about the book that we're talking about. So tonight has actually been focused, yay, on Lethal Prey. So I congratulate you, Nick. Good job. Right. So we've come to the moment now, because it's hard to sit in these chairs for more than an hour. They're not all that comfortable. I know. And we have to move the furniture before we can do the signing line. It's just the way it is. So we've come to the moment where we can give the book away. So, John, how many? 59. Thank you. I can always hear John. I love him. Would you pick a number between 1 and 59, and that person will be? Yeah.
1 and 59. I want to say 27.
All right. Is there a number 27?
27?
Way back there. All right, sir, when you come up to get your book. Now, the other thing is that John came in this afternoon and he signed all of the books. So if you don't need a photo or whatever it is, this is your moment to take your signed book, and good night. If you're saying...
Actually, I didn't sign any of the books that were on the countertop back there.
We'll get those done.
Nope.
Oh, you didn't sign any of those?
Nope.
Oh, I lied. Okay, those of you with numbers probably need to stand in line. Well. And be sure, if you missed a photo, to ask for one at the front desk. Anyway, if you would give the authors a round of applause.
You have some Sharpies? Because they told
I'll
me
get
not to worry about it.
Don't
Go ahead and
worry.
bring 'em.
I will take care of you. Do not worry.